Okay, welcome to our online audience now. We have everybody sitting here in the hall and some people that are trickling in. My name is Mark Barnico. I'm the executive director of the University of Chicago Francis and Rose Yuen campus here in Hong Kong. I want to welcome you to our online and in-person event today. As always, we encourage you to take a look at our website and sign up to our e-news at www.uchicago.hk. And you can also today scan the QR codes if you want to follow us on Facebook, YouTube, or any of the social media platforms that we manage here on campus. And if you share or take any photos today, we'd appreciate that if you could tag them on your social media accounts at hashtag Trailblazer Forum. And Shannon, who's responsible for our marketing here, promises me that she will retweet them or repost them or whatever we do on social media these days. So Hong Kong is the home to the University of Chicago's campus in Asia, where the university has this incredible opportunity to build upon its ambitious research, its world-class education, and deep institutional collaborations across the world, especially here in Asia. And as many of you may know, the University of Chicago is the only American university with a freestanding campus in Hong Kong. So we're really proud of that distinction. This campus in particular is the home to Chicago Booth's Executive MBA program, executive education, college study abroad, the Polsky Center for Entrepreneurship, and the Rustandi Center for Social Innovation. Today, we have the Trailblazer Forum, obviously dedicated to hybrid leadership that connects the University of Chicago UN campus in Hong Kong and the Asia community, our alumni and the broader Asia community. We're bringing senior thought leaders to campus from a variety of industries and disciplines to share their journeys. We've had the most recent Olympic gold medalist, for example, was one of our guests last year. We've had the senior leader from CNN Asia, Elena Lee. So we really like to have a cross-section of leaders from across a variety of industries. But today we want to welcome Jim Thompson, who is our Trailblazer Forum speaker this afternoon. He likes to go by Jim, so I'm going to call him Jim. He is a GBS and is the chairman and founder of the Crown Worldwide group of companies. Crown Worldwide is a logistics company performing a variety of warehouse and transportation services throughout the world. Encompassing more than 200 facilities worldwide now, Crown is committed to making a positive difference in every community where we live and work. And if you haven't read the story of Crown, there's an incredible book that talks about the history of Crown itself, which I encourage you to read if you're interested in learning more about Jim's journey. Crown's also a leader in the field of household removals, as well as information and document management, with over 50 million cartons of business documents managed at worldwide facilities. The company also provides special packaging and storage of fine arts and provides storage of fine wines, which I hope we'll talk about a little bit today. The group owns 75 warehouse facilities around the world and leases 100 others. Jim graduated from San Jose State University, and I think we have representatives from that university here today, with a bachelor's of science degree in aeronautical engineering. We want to know a little bit more about the pivot from aeronautical engineering to the business that he's created. Jim came to Asia shortly after completing university studies in 1963 and has lived in Japan and Hong Kong ever since. He's a member of the International Advisory Board of the San Jose State University Business School, and he serves as the chairman of the board and member of many charitable organizations with particular interests in children and cancer and education and the arts. He's chairman of the Asia Youth Orchestra and the honorary president of the Society for the Promotion of Hospice Care. And he's been mentoring university students in Hong Kong for over 20 years. And I'll let him tell you a little bit about his connection to UChicago when he comes up on the stage. Jim was also awarded the Gold Bohemia Star, Hong Kong's second highest award by the Hong Kong government in 2003. He received the honorary doctorate of business administration from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, as well as an honorary doctorate of humane letters from his alma mater, San Jose State University in California. And he also received the DHL SCMP Lifetime Achievement Award in 2014, as well as many other honors. So I hope you all give Jim a grand round of applause and welcome him up to the stage. And we're going to start our conversation this afternoon. You're going to sit here. Okay. Make sure our mics are on.
Yep. Well,
welcome today.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you back to campus.
This is more than a campus. I keep looking out there and I think if Li Ka-shing could get this property, it would be about a 30-story building of apartments.
I think he tried.
Oh, okay.
Oh, it's so nice to have you here today. Usually what I like to do is understand a journey in different phases and different components of one's life. And I guess what I'd like to really start with is understanding how you grew up and what characteristics you demonstrated as a child or as a young man that you look back on now as part of your career and say, you know, I always had entrepreneurial DNA.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was born in a place called Bayonne, New Jersey. It's just literally, I was born 2 miles from the Statue of Liberty. It's a town next to Jersey City, if you would have heard that, which is a very popular town for people who work in New York. And I was born at a time just around the time of World War II, and my father he joined the U.S. Navy, and he was gone for the duration of the war. So I was really raised by women, you know, my mother and her sisters and grandmother and that sort of thing. So the first 5 years of my life, I didn't really have many men in my life until my dad got back from the service. I actually don't know if I had any entrepreneurial spirit, but I think I wasn't a particularly good kid. And so maybe that feistiness had something to do with it in the end. Yeah, so I grew up in New Jersey, and then in the 50s, and I should say that in the family groups that I grew up in that particular town, if you graduated from high school, that was considered a success, and then you went out and got a job. And universities weren't really thought of too much in that town. So in 1952, my dad was reassigned in the Navy to the island of Guam. So that was my first time to leave the East Coast of the United States or leave the U.S. at all. And his next assignment was in California in the Bay Area. So that's where I went to high school and university at San Jose State. And I think at that particular time, two things happened. First of all, my dad was released from the Navy because of his age and the fact that he was a reserve officer. And I was in Air Force ROTC at San Jose State, and I took a year off, and the officer in charge said, no, you can't do that. And so those two things made me kind of angry about the U.S. and I guess about the military at least. And that's when I decided I'd kind of like to make my own decisions and be free to do that. So if there was any kind of entrepreneurial development, it probably happened about that time. The other thing that was unique is that when I was 20, I was a junior at university, and myself and a roommate, another fellow, we decided to make a trip first to Europe, and it ended up being around the world. And that trip obviously changed my life. I hadn't been to Europe. I hadn't seen things. And when I started to see the world and see different people, we went to India, we went to the Middle East, we went to other parts of Asia, and then ultimately ended up in Japan. It was my first trip, by the way, to Hong Kong. It was a short trip, but I was really amazed by this exciting little city. And I think when I got back to university to finish my engineering degree, it was at that point that I thought, I want to go back to the Far East. I loved what I saw. I hadn't seen enough, and I really wanted to get back to Japan. So more than anything, that drove me, and I was going to go whether I had a job or not. It so happened that at this point, my father was out of the military, and he was working for a company that was in a business that shipped U.S. military household goods around the world. And he was now in California, but he said, if you're going to Japan, I'll see if my boss will give you a job. And that became my first job. It was 1963. Entered Asia, entered Japan, and I had a job that was moving families that were assigned for the U.S. military. I don't know if everyone in the audience knows, but there are bases for U.S. military troops around the world, certainly in Japan, and at that time in the Philippines, in Thailand, Taiwan, and of course many in Europe. And it's a big business to move those families around. So that was my introduction to the moving business. So I took this first job and I was very excited about it, and I really was working hard. And my interest went from any kind of engineering to this kind of business. And after 18 months, my father left the company in California, and then his boss basically just sacked me and said, "You're on your own." And that's when I kicked off on my own business. And I was 20, actually 24, just about to turn 25, and had no money. But I thought I want to stay in Japan, so why don't I try this? And if it doesn't work, actually I actually sold my ticket. The company had given me a ticket to go back to California, but I actually cashed it in, and that became part of my startup capital. And it was, and if I failed, I hoped the American embassy would send me home some way.
So I'm just really interested in your choice of studying aeronautical engineering as well, and how you weren't compelled to go into that industry at a time when it was probably exploding in the U.S. Was
Mm.
your this desire to travel was so much stronger than your desire to work in that space?
I think it was, and I mean, I actually I was in the Air Force of the ROTC. I took all these air courses. I should have actually gone to work for one of the airline companies or Boeing or a manufacturer. That was what I was trained, and that was what my degree is. But yes, it was overridden by the fact that I figured I'll get there someday. But I now I want to see Asia. I want to do some traveling again before I settle down. And I think that overrode everything. So getting to the Far East was prime, and I just didn't want to leave once I got here.
Were there aspects of that education that you really look back and value now, that things that helped you build your career, would you say?
Not really. Hate to say that, but no, I did take some business courses, and I think academics is so important. So just the general education and the university experience was so important in my maturing process. So inevitably, you know, what I learned in college was academic, but also social and how to conduct myself. So I say my university really taught me that. My university time really taught me that. So I felt when I left college I was more of a man, ready to take on the challenges. But the actual courses, the engineering courses, uh, while I appreciated them, I don't know how I can say I would have applied them later in my life.
So then you find yourself without a job, with an one-way air ticket back to the States that you didn't want to use, and you decided to start your own business. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I had very little capital. I didn't have any outside funding or whatever, and it was almost, I don't want to say a hobby, but it was almost just an experiment to see if I could do it. What I did have, I had a handful of really talented people who did this kind of work, this packing work, and I also knew that I could now. I didn't have the military work anymore, but I could go to Tokyo and I could convince people to let us do their packing. There are a couple of advantages. One, there wasn't a lot of competition for what we did, and I would say that applied throughout Asia. There was sophisticated companies in Europe and of course the United States, but there really weren't many here. So people who needed packing could get packing, but they couldn't get much help with the onward transportation, and certainly on the other side. So I figured if we could put that together and we could make contacts with people around the world and do what they call a door-to-door service, that would be very, very useful. And in fact, that's what happened. That combined with the skilled people we had to do the jobs. I mean, in Hong Kong and Japan and other places, Singapore, we started up. the talent was incredible for just this type of work, and that was great. So getting started, while we didn't have much money, we were able to pull in customers who trusted us. And in our industry, in that industry, you normally did the work and shipped it out and sent the bill and got the money 2 months later or three, but I actually was able, out of necessity, to convince people to pay us in advance, which is what you do for your airline tickets, certainly. And I said, well, if you pay us in advance, and we'll pay all the bills. And that allowed us. That was actually our working capital, to be honest with you. This advance payment. So it worked out very well in terms of getting started, but we obviously were always hand to mouth. Uh, for quite a while, and we didn't really have much cash in hand on a day-to-day basis. That was a pretty stressful period, but we were so determined that we just said, let's keep going, let's somehow make it work, and that's how we got going.
I'm just really interested in the fact that you started in Japan,
Yeah.
one of the most difficult markets to operate a business in if you're not from Japan.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about some of the struggles
Well,
that you had, or how you made that work?
Yeah, in the 18 months that I'd worked for this other company, I had made some really good friends, young Japanese friends who I knew were excited about, getting a startup. And while I didn't offer them shares initially, I did say I would share the earnings if there was any with them. And I think they were just excited about the whole startup thing. So I know it seems unusual to start for a Westerner who didn't even speak Japanese to start up in Japan. But one of the things I find, and even today, I'll admit this up front because it's embarrassing, but I don't speak foreign languages. A few words here and there, but I don't hold conversations in foreign languages. And yet I've been in Asia for 61 years, so it is embarrassing to say I didn't get there. I will say my daughter speaks Japanese and my son speaks Mandarin, so I figured I did my bit and get some languages. And so it was quite possible for me to do sort of the expat side, get the business, convince them we would do it, in English very well. And then the Japanese people would come in and they would do just a fantastic job. And so the combination really worked in Japan. And Japan in this particular period in the 60s was very sensitive about foreigners coming in. And they actually, for bigger companies, they required joint ventures for most of the business. They didn't just let foreigners come in and manufacture on their own. And so, but our industry we were so small, and our industry they kind of didn't even really pay any attention to us in that regard. So I was able to have a wholly owned business. And every year for the first 5 years, we were able to double the sales that we had. So we started out, I think in the first year, we probably did $90,000 of business. But by the fifth year, we were at $1 million of business. And that's when we started thinking beyond Japan. So.
And then, so I know you were in Japan for how many years?
Well, I lived there for 15.
15.
Yeah.
And then the transition to Hong Kong and how all that came about. Could you talk a little bit about, and what prompted you to make that move to Hong Kong?
Well, I had been down to Hong Kong a few times after I'd started in Japan, mainly holiday periods. I came here in 1967, which was an infamous year here when there was rioting and that sort of thing. And but I always had in my head, maybe we should do something in Hong Kong. I wonder if I could figure that out. And then I met another man in the business in America, and he said, maybe we could put some money together and open an office in Japan. So we did that. We each put 25,000 US dollars into it, and we opened in Hong Kong in 1970. And it was an immediate success. I mean, Hong Kong was such a transient place. And just talking about the timing, I mentioned about riots in 67, and Hong Kong, it was a little bit scary at that time because the Red Guard movement was going on, the Cultural Revolution was going on in China, and there were really concerns that maybe that would lap over into Hong Kong, and these guys were so, violent at that point that maybe they'd just step into Hong Kong and take over the place. But in 1970, Mao Zedong had started to pull them back because it was a very destructive period for China as well. And so people who had left Hong Kong, expats in particular, were now starting to come back. And as I said, there was no serious competition here for what we were doing. So it was really an opportunity for us to get an awful lot of business quickly. And we made a profit the first year we were here. And then it just grew from there. And we established ourselves. The original name of the company in Japan was called Transport Services International. But when we opened in Japan, I didn't like that name. Even though it was the name of the company, I wanted to establish a name here that was more descriptive. And so we called it Crown, originally Crown, but then Crown Pacific was the actual name we could register. And so that was quickly acknowledged here. Maybe it was the Crown Colony thing or something. I don't know. We didn't think about that when we named it. But so our Hong Kong operation was so successful so quickly that we immediately started thinking, what's next? And so 2 years later, we opened in Singapore. The next year, we opened in Indonesia. And then we opened in Malaysia and Taiwan and the Philippines. And so pretty soon, we had an interesting little network of moving companies here in Asia. So,
And having just reviewed your Crown history before I greeted you this afternoon, I noticed that you actually had a warehouse right here in Kennedy Town, right down the street.
yeah,
That was
yeah. Our startup here, our first office was in what's now known as Lan Kwai Fong on the corner of Dagolar Street and whatever the cross street is there, and it was a tiny little building is still there, a tiny little office. And the first warehouse was in Smithfield Road. And I was mentioning it was so nondescript that when I went down to look at it when I was in town, the only way I could recognize it was that there was a sweet little old lady with a whole basket of live chickens that she was selling. And she was always there. So I said, oh, that's the entrance to our warehouse. And that's how I could identify it. But we quickly grew out of it and we moved to several other locations in Hong Kong. One other one here in Park Fulham, and then off to Kowloon side.
so maybe it's because you just described how you went into all these countries fairly rapidly. Maybe we can step back a bit and talk about like how the industry was evolving as a whole at that period of time. With you mentioned competitive sets. We talked a little bit about, and some of our audience here might be too young to know that the container was. This whole container shipping was established in 1956, and maybe talk a little bit about the market, how it was evolving, some of the innovations that you were seeing in the industry at that time.
Yeah, it's so interesting to me to have lived this long and to remember what we entered into places like Indonesia. It was really backward, and even Malaysia and those countries, they were quite protective of the indigenous population. So they had laws that any foreign entry could not have majority interest. You had to have local partners, which made it quite difficult to operate. And because very often the partners they were sweet when you started with them, but they were difficult when they started seeing you make profits. So it was an interesting transition. But on the broader picture, what I find amazing as I sit here today is just how Asia, Southeast Asia, Japan, the Asian Tiger Groups countries, and certainly China have developed in this part of the world. It is truly amazing. It's a miracle in many ways to see how the infrastructure, the population, everything about these countries has grown. And so it was a time when Western investors of big companies and small companies were coming out here in very, very significant numbers. And again, as I said, we were the company that you could rely on. We had international connections, and so we were in a good position to get the business from them. On the subject of containers, it is very. I watched the container ships floating outside the window there. This was one of the miracles of transport and indeed trade in the world. So when we started in our business, most cargo was loaded onto ships through the hold of the ships. You put it on a pallet on the dock, lifted into the hold. It was unloaded inside the ship. It seems now archaic, but that was the only way it was done. And then there was American guy named Malcolm Manson, no, not Malcolm Manson, Malcolm McLean, and he was a trucker, and he developed the concept of a container, which was so far-fetched at the time because I mean, the infrastructure of all ports wasn't set up for it, nor were the vessels. And he started a container service from New Jersey to Puerto Rico, and it was going to take every ship to be converted, or new ships coming off the ways and being built, and every port to be changed in order for that to be successful. And here we sit in 2024, and almost every ship is a container ship, and every port is geared with these big cranes to lift it off. I often wonder how it caught on, but I was saying to Mark that economically, for 1 ton of cargo in the old system, it cost about $6. Under the container system, it cost about 16 cents. So I think the economics of it made it clear that this system, if we could make it work worldwide, it would be there. That really, I would say the shipping rates today are no more than when we started 60 years ago for shipping a container of cargo. And so it's quite an interesting and the economics were simply that on the old system you paid by whatever the commodity was. So if it was TVs or toys, each one had different rates. But under the container system, it kind of didn't matter. It's the container, whatever is in it, whether it's full or half full or whatever, the rate was the same. So the economics of the whole industry, and just think of what that has done to global trade. It has just changed the whole face of globalization and trade. So it was an amazing change, and certainly for our business, it made a very.
Do you remember what year your first container
I would
was purchased, and like how it really transformed the business?
Yeah, I remember it was in the probably in the no, it would have been in the late 60s, early 70s when they actually had a proper service coming out here. I do remember at a lunch in Japan, an AmCham, American Chamber lunch, asking the head of Sealand in a forum like this. I said, "Why do you still charge commodity rates when you're using containers?" Meaning something a different rate for every commodity that's being shipped. And he very sheepishly said, "Oh, it's insurance and all this." But eventually that all went away, and it was obviously you're just paying for a box to be transported. I will say one of the things that's unique today, and I don't know if everybody's in the shipping business or the trading business, but the fluctuation of the rates is pretty dramatic. So there was a period where the rates were skyrocketing. What would have been, a $500 price was getting up to 2,000 for the same container because the demand was so great. And then they collapsed in a couple of years ago, and now they're going back up. It's very hard to determine prices in a trading business or even in our shipping business with that kind of fluctuation, but that's what it is.
So at that point, you established your roots in Hong Kong. Let's talk a little bit about Hong Kong back then, and then talk about it, later we'll talk about it now, and whether it offers some of the same, attributes that it offered you when you first started your business here.
Yeah, well, I gave a talk not too long ago to the Our Hong Kong Foundation, and I took us back in my lifetime, not when I lived here, but I went back to 1940, and I talked about World War II when the population in Hong Kong went from 1.6 million to 600,000. And the purpose of my talk, as I went through the decades, was to show all the challenges Hong Kong itself has faced over those years. The influx of people from China, where people were living on the sides of hills, and the government of Hong Kong faced all these challenges, and some of them were tough, and yet Hong Kong kept coming out of it in better shape than when it went into it, and that continued. So I mentioned the 67, moving ahead to 67. That was a very threatening period for Hong Kong. And people who were here were literally, a lot of them left because they were afraid it wasn't going to be around. And that's kind of when we started here. And that's the conditions we found. And as you go beyond that, you still find things like there was a drought where no one could get water, and they didn't know if that was going to be permanent. Hong Kong depended and still depends on China for much of its water, most of its water. And China could have just turned that faucet off. So I love this city so much because it's been through all these challenges, medical challenges such as SARS and COVID, economic challenges where the currency was fluctuating, and political challenges as we faced over the last couple of years in particular. And the handover itself was a political challenge. But Hong Kong always came out strong, just this amazing city. And as we sit here today, there is concerns. Oh, is this a big problem, with the downturn in economics in China? Uh, and from our perspective, I mean, and the businesses we do, uh, we've seen the same thing of ups and downs, but we always come out stronger in every case. And I have no doubt that we are on the way back, bouncing back again, and we will be a lot stronger, in the coming year or the years ahead as Hong Kong does its thing and just gets better and better all the time. And from a business perspective, yeah, I think you were curious about COVID. We did get hit with COVID, and thank God a lot of places like Hong Kong, the government supplemented industry to help them keep employees working. Uh, and and fortunately, also by this time, we had diversified our businesses to such an extent that we didn't depend strictly on the moving business itself. And some of our businesses were not affected by COVID at all, such as the storage business and the document business. So yeah, I would just say to any Hong Kong audience that uh, stay positive about this place. It's one of the greatest cities in the world. I think uncomparable in many ways. And I think it will continue that way, despite our current situation or despite what's up in the future. Very
So
positive.
all along the way, as you're building your business, competitors are coming into place. There's probably a desire for folks to consolidate. Were you getting offers to buy the company, and how did you deal with those? What kept you kind of on the path of being independent?
Yeah, the first offer to buy the company was when we were very small, actually just in Japan at that time. And I was kind of excited. Somebody really thinks my company's worth buying, and I thought, wow, that's interesting. So I went through the process of that sale, and in my heart, I didn't want to do it, but something else was pushing me, to get whatever money I would get out of it. In fact, the company that was wanting to buy us was listed on an American exchange, and they were going to buy us with their shares. And I got right to the point. I went to California. We were in the room. All we had to do was figure out the final details, sign the documents. And the guy that was on the other side, he was a New York kind of a pushy guy, and he got stroppy about something we asked for, and we broke for lunch. So I went to lunch with my lawyer, and I sat there and I said, I can't do it. I can't sell the company. Please go back and tell him the deal's off. And he did that, and I think he shocked them. And I went back to Japan and continued my company. And then a couple of years later, the company that was going to buy us went bankrupt. And all I would have had would have been the shares, no money at all. And so, somebody was looking at me, down on me at that time and said, do it. In later years, there was certainly many issues of people wanted to acquire the company and still are. But the bigger thing was trying to take us public. And we were now a sizable company, and they said, you should list the company. And that was the one I felt most proud of resisting, because I would go to very nice lunches with investment bankers telling me why the joys of going public. And I knew in my heart I wasn't going to do it, but I just wanted to learn the process of how it worked. And so we have resisted that. We remain private. Now, those of you who might work for public companies, there's advantages. You get more capital and all the rest of it. But we had built such a culture in our business. We felt it was a very close culture. And I knew that if we went public, that the employees would probably be looking more at what's the share price today than sticking to the culture we built of high quality service and just a lot of camaraderie in the business. So I'm very thankful that we have stayed private all these years, and it's made a big difference, I think, into the feeling we have in our group today.
So, two kind of interconnected topics I want to cover with you. I don't know if you've heard this new term that's coming out of Silicon Valley called founder mode. Founder mode. Okay, founder mode. You can Google that. It's really kind of talking about how founders in Silicon Valley running companies have typically and historically kind of been more hands-off, more focused on strategy, investor relations, things like that. And founder mode is we need to come back in and get our hands dirty and manage the people.
Yeah.
Right. We can't just let them do whatever because they're professionals. Right. So I really wanted to talk to you about your management style in the early days, how you saw it evolve. Were you, heavily into the details? Were you more focused on strategy? Did you find yourself having to be all of those things? How did you deal with managing and people? And because it's a people business. I mean, every business is a people business, but this one in particular, right? You really need your people to come through for you. So.
Yeah, particularly in a service business, it's a people business. When we were in Japan as a young company, yeah, I did everything. I was involved with everything at least. And whether it be I went out packing some days, and then you'd have to work on the finances and the marketing and the whole bit. I felt the company was revolving around me. When we opened in Hong Kong, now we're thousands of miles away from where I lived, and so there was a different dynamic to that. I think my management style is what I would call decentralized. As we opened offices in different countries of Asia, uh, I I found that the people we put in charge of those operations were some cases more talented than I was. If you can find people who love working on their own, it's just amazing what they will produce for you. So I found that by decentralizing and not looking over their shoulder at every little thing, people will produce amazing things for you. So the managers of our branches in Southeast Asia, and I like to think even today that still applies all over the world. As we got bigger and more structured, we had to put in systems, check financing system, budgeting type stuff, and other things that protect us because we would be subject to lawsuits and everything. We had to make sure we didn't have loose cannons out there. And so when we first did that in the 70s, actually, the original managers that we had hired, many of them left because they were so happy running their own shop, but now having to spend half of their time reporting and doing things like that, they didn't like the atmosphere anymore. And that was a big shock to me. I thought, we got to do this. Why are you leaving? But then we brought in or promoted other people into the role, and they understood this is the system, and they did it just as well. It worked out really well. So it was a transition. But I have to say that I still feel that if you find the right type of person to manage a unit of your company, a branch or whatever, they can do amazing things. A case in point, we have many, but India, we went into India late, and we have a man there now who actually went to Booth. He's probably online right now, Srinivas, and he became the manager of this. We now have, I can't, Srini, how many? We have about 12 branches in India. We've built a number of buildings. It's one of the most successful and productive parts of our business. And he basically runs it on his own. I mean, not completely on his own, but he gets guidance and support from our technology people and all the rest of it. But I found that that's an example of how you can take a qualified human being who has a lot of talent and watch what he can do for a part of the company. And we have many others. I don't own it. I go through all of them, but it's been a great part of our success is that we've managed in that way.
And how do you keep people motivated through incentives or, what management style, aspects of your personality, charisma, what are the things that help to incentivize, motivate, and then keep people in the organization that are quality people?
Well, I would go back to the point I made. If a person has their own authority, I think that's almost self-motivating because they're creating all the time. whether it's, developing a new facility that we've purchased or built, or whether they're starting a new business. We have now a number of different businesses beside the original moving business. And we say, can you start that in this country? And that kind of is exciting and motivating, not for just the manager, but the employees. We do have obviously monetary incentives every, based on the performance of the business. So in that sense, they are in charge of their own income or compensation. Uh, and so I think those things are, and as I go back to this, we have a culture. I mean, we have a few people here. We have a really good culture in our company. The fact that I'm still alive is kind of interesting, because all companies that have a founder that is still alive, even if he's not in the managing role so much anymore, is kind of like this guy that, they kind of are proud of in some way. But in fact, I am not really in the executive roles anymore, and yeah, so I think uh, you'd have to ask them what incentivizes them, but
Okay.
but I think that's some of the elements that they're part of it.
I have to ask you, because every business faces this kind of thing. Was there ever a point when you thought, we're not going to make it? Tell us a little bit about that. Maybe there was more than one example.
Yeah, I have one, and it's in the book, and the chapter is called "To the Brink." We always were living sort of on the edge in terms of having enough finances to keep everything going. Uh, but I had this partner for the Crown Pacific operations, and that was in 1970. By 1978, this family that I was in business with decided they wanted to sell their interest. And they came to me and they said, "We're going to give you first option to sell." Now, that was like a dream come true, but if I didn't know how I was going to be able to buy it. And so what happened over, I had 2 year period to come up with the cash in increment payments. And we did have a few small properties here that I could trade my interest in, which was fine. But I had to draw a lot of money out of the company to make these payments. So a lot of the branches were seeing me take the cash to pay for the equity that I was buying, but leaving them to struggle with their own bills to pay. I guess I was somewhat insensitive to that, because in my heart I knew 2 years later it would be all over and we'd get back and we'd do some great things. Anyhow, because there was this sort of disenchantment in the company that I wasn't really sensitive to. One of my key managers, an American guy actually, who was the finance director, had convinced a number of people, particularly here in Hong Kong, that the company was going to go bankrupt. And so he convinced them to break away and form a competitive company. And it hollowed us out to a certain extent, particularly here in Hong Kong. And that was very, very devastating to me, more emotionally, I guess. And I thought to myself, all these years I've been working, and why does this happen to me? Is it all worth it? But what happened, which was amazing to me, was that the people they took from the company obviously went away. The people they didn't take, who were more clerical people in offices, they suddenly said, okay, we can do that. Jobs they weren't trained to do, they immediately started picking up the phone, taking orders, doing all the things that they'd heard other people do. And when I saw that, I said, I got to pull myself up and become a leader again. And we did that, and we came out of it amazingly well. We had obviously a bad year or so, but because this company took a lot of our accounts away, behind my back, I should say. But once we were out of it in the 80s, we just up onward and upward, and I was really proud, because now I did have complete control of the company and no partners to deal with. So.
And is that the period of time when that took place, when you decided you needed to expand into other lines of business, or did you have to keep building on the
Yeah,
current line before you did that?
Mark, what was happening, because we were the logistics company with men in warehouses and trucks, we were called on to do different types of things, but it wasn't a line of business, but whether it be a painting, a high value painting, or other types of things. So we had little training in some of those areas. But it wasn't until about 1985, we'd wanted to store business documents. A lot of things I went into, I'd heard through other companies around the world in our business that were doing bits and pieces of that. And I thought, well, we could do it in this kind of virgin territory of Asia. And so the storage of our business documents really kicked off in 1985. And it's interesting, if there is an ideal city for that business, it was here in Hong Kong, where we had financial houses and accountants and lawyers, the big customers in that business, but there was no service. There was no service offered. No one was doing it. So part of our difficulty really was convincing those companies to give their physical documents to us to store. So we had to, that was the hardest sale, but using us wasn't so hard because there was no other competition. But once it kicked off and started to roll, it was amazing how we had this second big business into our system. And as you mentioned in your opening, we've built that up around the world to something in the neighborhood of 50 million cartons that are on shelves in storage around the world. And then from that, we had other occasions of fine arts where we would develop into fine arts. Some people would ask us to do their paintings. Through that skills and through a few acquisitions we've made in Europe, particularly, we started to say we have the expertise to do this. We had a good reputation with the name, the brand we had, and it started to pick up. And so that was another diversification we got into. And the first entry we had into China, I might add, it was in what we now call logistics, but China was actually searching out here for oil in the South China Sea, not the big South China Sea so much, but nearer to China. And they didn't have the expertise, so they brought in a lot of American drilling companies, and from that we got a lot of moving in China and a lot of handling of technical equipment, drilling equipment, and that sort of thing. So those things just kind of came by nature, and then we tried to, we did develop them into businesses.
So you mentioned high value items, and if I got my research correct, you've moved the Mona Lisa and you've also moved pandas to Ocean Park. Which one was more difficult for the company?
Well, the Mona Lisa wasn't that hard because it only was going from one part of the Louvre to another. But so we were asked to handle it, and of course it's not particularly a big painting, and but it's just that it's priceless, in that sense. And we did some other really big ones. I don't know if Night Watch from Rembrandt was in the Rijksmuseum in Holland, and that one we did take out and store for a while, and many, many others. But the pandas were amazing. I was on the board of Ocean Park at the time, and the pandas were coming down, and so the president or the CEO of Ocean Park, a guy named Tom Neerman, he said, "Can you guys do this?" So we said, "Yeah, we'll do it for free." We don't. It was such an emotional thing for Hong Kong to bring these pandas in from China, and it was like it was like a major moving a president or something, because we had to be out at the airport. The pandas had to be moved onto special special trucks. One of our license plates, you might see it around, is called Panda now. And then we had a huge police escort that took us from the airport to Ocean Park. It was so amazing to see it. But the young driver who's still with us, he was given the task of driving the truck with the panda in the back. I talked to him later, and I found out that the whole time he was driving, he had tears running down his eyes, that I've been the guy that's selected to move the pandas. And now with the new pandas out there and some more coming, it is it's almost like part of history, part of Hong Kong history now. Is one of the sweetest thing. I always think China can do so much goodwill by giving pandas to people around the countries around the world, and yet there's all this nonsense going on. But yeah, we were very, very proud to have that job, even though we didn't get paid for it.
So before we go to audience questions, my last question for you is, so you started your business in the 60s from scratch, and built it into a global company from Hong Kong as an American. Is that still possible today?
Absolutely. I mean, because we opened in so many cities around the world, and we've seen what it's like to open, uh, you face issues of corruption, you face issues of bureaucracy and high taxes, even though you're always getting enticed to open here or do business there. And so I think I can speak pretty authoritatively to say there's no place like Hong Kong for doing business. The elements are all here and as you know, there is many, many regional offices still here for the Asia region. So obviously others have found that out. But whether it's a regional office or a global office, I don't think it makes any difference. Hong Kong is still for us is the best, and you can certainly people can do that today. I'm always amazed why more companies haven't set up their regional operations here, or their global operations here, I should say. But maybe a big structured company says, well, we have to have uh, Europe, Middle East, Africa under one banner, Asia Pacific under another banner, North America under another banner, and we kind of had that structure, but we always had Hong Kong as the headquarters, and it will continue to be our headquarters, because I mean, if you just look at it, at all the aspects of doing business here, it is so right for a business person to look at and say, whether it be taxes or uh, you know the lack of bureaucracy, shortage of, and all of those things fit in to me, to my mind. This is the place to be for a headquarters. Yeah. So wouldn't change that.
Great. With that, let's see who in our audience has questions. We have two microphones, one person distributing microphones in the back. So if you have a question, go ahead and raise your hand,
I love questions, by
please.
the way.
Yeah,
No
he's
matter
looking
what it
forward to
is.
your questions. I can see questions bubbling up over there. Okay, Jason, up front here, Lillian.
I was inspired by the disruptive innovation of containers that you mentioned and how it transformed from $600 or $6 to 16 cents. What's the next disruptive innovation you could imagine would happen in your industry like that?
It's interesting because so much change and disruption is taking place in so many industries. In our case, moving seems to be up and down, but always there. I think people will always want to be. So I don't see that going away. We'll have to deal with the variations, and also uh, the document business we do might go into more digitization and that sort of thing. But so far, it's holding up. Uh, but I've come to the conclusion, in answer to that question, is that of all the industries and all the disruption they can face, at the end of the day, a product has to be made somewhere in the world, and it has to be consumed somewhere in the world. And as the world has developed in the globalization phase, at least, that those production places are, well, say outside of the wealthy countries, outside of the high wage countries, but they're consumed in those places. So from our business perspective, we see that there will always be a need for the logistics industry. Things will always, you can't magically make something appear. And it's not likely that, you know, I know there is a big move here to sort of punish China because they're so effective and so efficient and all the rest of it, but I don't believe that can be sustained. I don't think a product can be made in the United States without raising prices tremendously and causing a huge inflation effect on that. So I think globalization is in place, and with that will always be a need for logistics. The transitions that have taken place through e-commerce, for example, of how you buy that product, obviously has changed, and it's become very efficient and effective to just go to the web, pick that product. I want it, in 3 days or whatever it is, and that now can be done. But it still takes a manufacturer, and it still takes some kind of a company to get it there. So, it's whether it's ships or planes or whatever, trains or trucks, it's still going to have to happen. And I know there have been a lot of, efforts like the just-in-time storage, which is don't have excess industry in different places. But then when you need that product and the industry, the inventory's not there, it's a big problem. So I can't see what the next transition will be in terms of the modes of transportation. But I do think that the logistics industry generally will be around indefinitely. And I might just add, if I could just add a comment on that, because uh, this whole issue of globalization, I am a globalist. I am a great believer in globalization. I think this is from an international trade perspective. We want to have the best product. We don't really care where it's made at the best price we want. And to punish companies that are efficient, especially in things that we need, like solar panels or electric vehicles or that sort of thing, which the whole world says we need that, and say, oh, you can't have them from China because, they have too big a market. No one else makes them. They have 80% of the market. We should be encouraging that to be spread around the world. I get so upset when particularly the United States punishes Hong Kong and China for these things. And I honestly, I was sitting there the other day, I said, I bet if China came up with an amazing life-saving drug, the United States would say, well, we're not going to have it here because it's, there might be some secrets in there that just frustrates me. But I think the world does need globalization. It has to be adjusted for, to save industries in different places, but it should not be punished for being efficient in that regard. By the way, I don't know if I mentioned or you mentioned, but I have two grandkids that went to the University of Chicago. One graduated, she's got a wonderful job, and the other one, who was here for the Elena Trailblazer, just happened to be here, is now finished his first year straight A's. By the way, I'm pretty proud of that. And he's probably listening, actually, Liam Harvey, and he's going back for a second year very soon, and he's been exposed to University of Chicago, and he's very, very proud to be a part of it.
I thought it might be better coming from you, actually.
Oh,
I'm glad that you brought that up. So
yeah, no, they're very proud, University of Chicago.
we're happy to have them too. Other questions? Buddy, yes. Christina.
Hi, thank you for this very inspiring talk. I wanted to ask if you could maybe expand on the whole art part of your business, on how you got into that, and how it if that changed the business in any way, or if you had to adapt to it, because I guess that transporting a Rembrandt or the Mona Lisa might be different from transporting a couch.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Most definitely it's different because, as I said, some of these things are priceless. So the customers for that type of thing would be museums, private collectors, galleries, or the big art shows that are constantly showing up around the world, Art Basel, that sort of thing. And yeah, I mean, when the kind of packing you have to do for that is quite different than any of the household packing. It's very sturdy crates. And in fact, some of the big pieces we've moved, I mean, huge pieces, it's almost requires an engineering process because, they're determining the weight and getting them in the right place and everything. The business is interesting. In France, the museums, which are many, are all basically paid for by the government. And the curators of the museums are not business people, so they do waste a lot of money. Some of that's changed. I think the government has put some business people in to manage that type of thing. But museums and some others, they really don't want to pay a lot for the service, even though it's very special and very delicate. So we've kind of gone back and forth. We find that one of the best parts of that fine arts is the storage aspect of it. People who are collectors, they love buying, but they don't have enough walls to put it on, enough houses to put it on. So, but they still want it, and so we store it in very perfect conditions, I would say, for that. So that's been a big aspect of the business. The packing and moving of it, of course, is important, and we do a lot of that as well. So I think we have actually opened in some areas, and well, first let me say this: the market for that type of work is in big cities. You don't really find it in the outlying areas of that. But the whole art industry has been growing people really want, they see the investment value in having good art, whether they're displaying it or not. Some people, you see the results of auctions. It's amazing how a piece of canvas with some paint on it could bring in, 10, 20 more million dollars just because people, but they probably look at it almost as an investment. They always figure they can sell it for the same amount. Our role in it is, you know, one of the people who we feel we can do it, but the objects are priceless. We don't insure them. The owner has to insure them because we'd be wiped out in one loss if that were the case. But we do show them that we can really handle them well, and so I think our reputation within the art of the fine arts art world is strong, and our logistics facilities are really impressive to see. They're very, very special. Security obviously is a big thing, and so it's one aspect of business that very specialized, but we've been successful in it, and we're going to continue at it.
While we're waiting for the next question, there was a follow-on that came in online asking about your wine business
Yeah.
and how you got into that and kind of where you store. I think I've been to your the cellar for
Cellars,
dinner.
yeah, the Crown Wine Cellars are in Houston Hill. If you haven't been there, you should go there. It's they're old. The ones over there are old bunkers that were built to defend Hong Kong. They were built in 1938, and it was to defend Hong Kong when the Japanese invasion came. And of course, Hong Kong lost the war in 12 days, so the bunkers were probably mostly used by the Japanese. But they were very strong, unused facilities, and so we approached the government and said, "Can we use these for the storage of wine?" Now, there had been no place in Asia, well, that I was aware of, where it had perfect conditions for storing wine. And most of you, well, you should know that wine actually ages as it sits, particularly red wine. And as you store it in the right temperature, right humidity, all the conditions, it gets better. So people like to age it and drink it. But a lot of wine, just like art, is actually an investment, an appreciating investment. So if you were to buy new wines, if you're young and buy new wines today and you just sit on them, I guarantee you they're going to be worth a lot of money in the future, because that's just the way the market goes for collection. So we approached the government and we said, can we rent these facilities? At that time in Hong Kong, there was a pretty stiff tax on wine. And so they agreed. We worked out an agreement for a 7-year lease on the bunkers, we call them, and we set it up. And we got some collections come in. It was slow. It was really slow. And we put, I don't know, $20 million into converting these things and everything. But then in 2004, our financial secretary, well, the first one was Henry Tang, and he was a big wine collector, and he took half the duty off wine. And he was very nervous because I think it's a personal thing. But fortunately, that year, there was so much of a surplus in Hong Kong. Everybody got goodies and no one went after him. The next year, the financial secretary was John Chung. He took it down to 0. And when that happened, the wine, as long as we had the proper storage facilities, the wine came in much bigger numbers. And Hong Kong converted into wine cellars, a wine center. So it's very unique that a government would take tax off something like wine, a luxury product, but in doing it, was very entrepreneurial. They turned this into the center for wine in Asia. So today we have much more wine than we can keep in those bunkers that we've rented. So we've converted one of our warehouses or parts of our warehouse into perfect wine storage conditions. And so now we have about 1 million bottles of wine, most other people's wine, not mine, but and and it's set there beautifully. And when people want it back, we deliver whatever they want back to them. But again, security is a very key factor in this because a case of wine is about this size, and it could be worth $25,000. So it's if it were ever to get out of your hands, stolen or anything like that, it's a big loss for a relatively small piece of material. So anyhow, it's gone extremely well, and and we have a restaurant there that people come taste wine or have food or whatever, and it's delightful. It's hidden away. Not many people Sam, have you been there?
I've been,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's very good. I can highly recommend it.
It's great.
Do you have a special area of interest in terms of collecting yourself in art or wine, or was this all just driven out of the business?
Well,
nature?
my collecting came, yeah, because other people did it. I got a little like, hey, maybe I should have some of that. And my wife and I we do love art, but we're not into the really high expensive stuff. We love stuff that we like. And yeah, I have a collection of wine, but yeah, now I find that wine doesn't treat my body as well as it used to. So I can't drink as much as I did before. But there's nothing like sitting with someone and tasting some really special wine and trying to figure it out. But yeah, it's a fun, relaxing experience. Yeah.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh yeah, now the hands are going up. Good.
I'm Felix Fong. I'm from the private banking business. Well, listening this seminar, I'm impressed you are a terrific businessman. And I'm also impressed by the scope of business and the growth of your business. But somehow, at certain stage of life, you might have to plan for your second generations. I'm very curious. I mean, is your sons and daughter are in your company? Or if not, how do you develop them within the company or outside?
Thank you, Felix. That's a very appropriate question. I mean, I used to be, when I was younger, people asked me questions about what are you going to do next year? And now they say, who's going to take over? Except that, well, I think she's on camera. I think she's on the other end of that video. My daughter has been in the business for 30 years. Well, she grew up in it, basically. She went to Columbia, graduated from Columbia, and then worked in a mergers and acquisitions company in Philadelphia. And actually, my wife, who is not her mother, but she said, "Would you ever like to work for your dad?" And she said something like, "Do you think he'd want me?" And that was the beginning. And so she worked for us in Japan, in Singapore, in New York, and lives in New York. And now she's got children of her own, two of them who have gone to University of Chicago, and she's very, very talented. So I had delegated a gentleman who worked for me for many years to be the CEO, but he passed away about a year ago. And so I made the decision at that point. I had three possible candidates. And I said to Jennifer, because she'd been with us the longest, she's not a young kid anymore. And I said, would you take on the responsibility? And she has done that. And she's done a terrific job in a rough market right now. And it meant her kids were sort of out of the nest. They all either graduated or were going to college. And she now has the rest of the team on her side and is doing great. So for me to be alive when that succession takes place, I don't know if you watched the movie Succession. Did you see that? And the way that guy played his kids, I should have said, I have two children. I have a son as well. He's younger. He's 6 years younger. And he is more of an entrepreneurial mind. So he kind of wants to do his own thing, and that's what he's doing. But I felt Jennifer, my daughter, she had much more skill in managing people and therefore managing the entity itself, because that's really what it comes down to. So yeah, she's taken the baton, and I think they're in our Milan office right now, and I'll meet her up in London in a couple of weeks. So yeah, I feel very comfortable that transition has taken place, and it's been well accepted by the management of the company. It's a very good question, because it was something that's been on my mind for a very long time, as to how to make that and make that transition properly, and I feel I've done that.
Next question here.
Hello, sir. My name is Tom, and I'm a student from Victoria Shanghai Academy. So I have a question: is that, so what kind of suggestions do you have for teenagers that's trying to pursue like a career in business?
Are you still in school?
Oh, yeah, I'm still a high school student, sir.
You're a high school student. Okay. Well, I think the qualities of an entrepreneur, that's what you're referring to, right? Being an entrepreneur. You find out a lot about, what you're made of when these things happen. So if you really feel that, I would say, first of all, in my case, I mean, right now, tech is a big thing. Develop an app, sell it for $500,000 in 3 years or 4 years or something to a big company. I have a hard time thinking of that as the true entrepreneur because it's just a make a deal, get rid of it, and whatever, unless they go on something else. I think when you commit yourself to be an entrepreneur, you should really think long term because it's not something it's something you're going to work at for a long time to find success. Obviously, you have to have the right idea. I've had some of my mentees come to me and they really want to be in what do you think I should do? Well, I'm not going to tell them what to do. You have to figure that out. Whereas there is a gap in society or in business or whatever. So that's one thing. The other thing I would say is that even if you don't have your own money, but you need to get outside money, be very careful of giving up too much equity too quickly. And I think that's a trap you fall into. You know, you've got something going, you can't really get to the next step. Someone comes along and say, well, I'll give you this much money for 60% of your company. And maybe it'll work, but at the same time, you've just become somewhat of a slave to that investor. So in my case, I had one partner, but that was it. And I think that was very important. You'll grow slower. You won't have all that capital, but maybe that'll be a good discipline not to have it. But you really have to have a determination. You have to stay with it and consider yourself, this is my life's work, whether it is or not. And then just, put all the pieces together. And when you face dilemmas, which inevitably will happen, and you think, how do I solve that? As Mark said, one of the chapters of the book is to the brink, and that takes you to a point you didn't want to be, and you don't know what you're going to do about it. But you find out, are you the kind of person that can push yourself through that? Can you solve that problem and work your way through? If you do that, and you might have to do it many times, then I think you can become a successful entrepreneur, work for yourself, have that freedom, and hopefully, have a good money, have a lot of money out of it as well. And maybe someday later you would sell it or bring in partners, but really get it off the ground first. I hope those are some elements that will give you some thought.
If I can add to that, don't wait. Start when you're young,
Yeah.
really get started. We're really trying to get high school students to come to this campus to develop the skills for developing their own businesses early. It's a lot easier to do it when you're young. I think you're a good example of that.
Yeah, I started young, but I was pretty naive, but you learn as you go, and it's a good life lesson.
I think we had one other student question. Are you a student as well? Okay.
Where? Here?
Freshman where?
Yeah, in Chicago.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, starting
Welcome.
like in a week.
All right.
Are you going
Um,
back?
Yep.
Oh,
Thank you very much for
Tell us your
sharing with
name.
us.
Tell us your name.
Ryan.
fine.
Yeah, thank you very much for sharing with us. I could have a follow-up question about like your diversification of your business. Was there like a point where you thought you were like spreading yourself a bit too thin?
Yeah.
Were you like aware of that?
Yeah, I'm sure there were certainly times when I couldn't keep my hand on everything. Um, I would just go back to the fact that you have to trust people. I think one of the first lessons I learned was this whole art of delegation. And I learned it in the Japan days. And I'll give you the example that I always stood in my mind because everything was Japanese. And so we got to the point where we could buy a couple of trucks. It was Isuzu was the seller. The salespeople didn't speak any English, so I could have sat there and observed. But I said to two of my guys that worked for me in Japan, I said, well, here's the price I think would be a good price. Here's the asking price. Here's what I think would be a good price. You go in and negotiate to get to that price. Well, they were in for an hour and a half and they came out and they said, oh, we got a much better price. And I thought to myself, you know, why would I even be involved if these guys could do it so much better than I? And there were many instances along the way that I actually could see people doing the job much better than I would have done it myself if I had to do it. So the delegating facet is a little bit scary for some entrepreneurs. They figure they've got to handle everything themselves and they don't want to take a chance to something, but you have to do it if you're going to grow. You have to make those decisions. So And the question of did I feel we were spread too thin? Yeah, there probably were times, but you just have to accept that. We operate on what we call controlled growth. Controlled growth simply means whatever you do, whether you buy a company or make a commitment to some investment, you don't want to lose control of the company. It's hard to think, well, I'm going to put this into that, and if I lose it, I don't want to think about losing it. But if you do, it's not going to disrupt the whole entity. So most of the expansion we did, we never, what they say in America, bet the farm. You never risked everything for that one investment. And even if you do and it doesn't go the way you think it's going to go, you just have to grit your teeth and stay with it. And it may not have the returns you had on your projection sheet, but you still can make it work to some degree, even if it doesn't make money for a couple of years. So yeah, but it is an excellent point about. I just one example. I know time is probably short, but I knew a friend here. He was an investment banker, made a lot of money, and had an idea. Got out, became an entrepreneur. He set up a baby shop thing, and he decided to bring in the best quality baby carriages and cribs and all that. He had a retail outlet, and he went online. And I was impressed but he was only into it about a year or a year and a half. And he said, "Oh, I got to do this in Singapore and I got to do it in Taiwan." The whole thing collapsed because he spread himself too thin. He ran out of money and it just didn't go the way he thought it could go. So it definitely can happen if you get too carried away with the fact that you found the secret, to making businesses work. You have to always maintain control of what you're doing and not take too big a risk that will blow everything up. We fortunately have been able to do that.
Great advice. Well, we're at that point in time where we have to say goodbye to our online audience first. And before we do that, obviously, I wanted to thank Jim for his time today. This has been really enlightening. I knew it would be what it has been today. The first time I met you, I could tell you're the kind of person that we get a lot of value out of hearing from, and
Thank
we
you.
hope to continue hearing a lot from you. I just wanted to mention, especially for Ryan and the students in the back, we have online programs this fall coming up, one of which is the U.S. presidential election series, which I think we're going to have a slide or two to show you that. So we have 4 UChicago faculty who will be doing programs starting next week, September 19th, one in October, one in November, and one in December after the election. And these are the professors from UChicago that'll be presenting. This will be all online. Obviously, the professors will be very busy in Chicago with the election, but we did this in 2020 and it was a highly successful program, and we're doing it again. And you can see each of the various topics, starting out with next week's The Era of Violent Populism in America, which has been a really interesting topic. And Professor Robert Pape is an expert in this field of violent populism. So you might want to tune in for that one. And getting all the way down to the last episode, which we're hoping we can acknowledge the resilience of American democracy when it's all said and done. So I just want to make sure that you all know about that program, as well as know about the course podcast, which we always try to tell you about, especially Ryan, as you're selecting faculty for your upcoming classes. The course, I think we have about 130 faculty who've done interviews on the course podcast, talking about how they became professors. So across the entire university. So business school, Harris School, Jason will include you in an upcoming episode, hopefully. So yeah, I hope all the students can take advantage of that, and the adults too. It's very informative and fun to listen to. So with that, I'd like to say goodbye to our online audience. Thank you so much for joining us today. And once again, thank you to Jim Thompson